All right, here's our last set of world history notes. Maybe for this week, maybe it's the first set for next week. We'll see what it looks like in terms of me uploading stuff. But hopefully it's the last one you see from me in this same green shirt until after my next laundry day. So, in terms of how this set of notes will help you fill out part of your interactive notebook, first, it will give you a couple of terms to fill in on the term sheet if you have not done so already. But secondly, it will kind of set the stage for the Allied powers in the same way that we kind of talked about the rise of, the different fascist or authoritarian leaders of the soon to be dubbed Axis powers. So, in terms of consuming this content, this map should look fairly familiar to you. It's the map that we looked at the end of the first set of notes in terms of did fascism or authoritarianism lead to the toppling of some democracies. So look at this. You should look at your copy because my ugly mug was in the way for the first part of it. But how many countries were still democratic? That's your green color. Number two, which country was the most responsible for taking over or dismantling democracies? And then again, number three, which we maybe will have talked about by office hours. If not, we know that your answer maybe has changed a little bit since the appeasement notes. How did England feel about the spreading of dictatorships? So today we're talking about the rise of the Allied powers. We'll talk about prominent leaders from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, and kind of use that to set the stage for our big focal point, or one of two big focal points of the World War II unit, talking about some battles of World War II, and then we'll look at the Holocaust as kind of the second pivot point in terms of kind of a major paradigm shifting event. So the first individual that we will talk about is the first of two American presidents to take the helm during World War II. The first is FDR. And here's a picture of him sitting with Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he's enjoying a nice cigarette with a lovely tapered fancy Garoise at the end. And that's one of those things. I know that cigarette smoking is going out of vogue and way, way by the wayside. But I wonder why people stop smoking out of that, random little pipe that you would put your cigarette in and then smoke out of the skinny end. I don't know. Not fancy anymore. So, before the United States actively got involved in the war, one of the things that the United States did to maintain this notion of supporting our allies in England and France is the Lend-Lease Act, which is essentially an arms agreement in terms of helping increase the armaments to our allies without getting directly involved. And then Pearl Harbor happens, where the Japanese sneak attack a U.S. naval base on the islands of Hawaii, and he oversees the transition to a wartime economy. He also becomes instrumental in planning the strategy against Germany and Japan. If you're interested and want a little bit more information on the Lend-Lease Act, here's a quick little video from the History Channel that you can, pause my video and check this out in your copy of the notes. But here's a picture of Roosevelt, again, rocking the Garoise, Churchill, and then Stalin, who we'll talk about as kind of a rising aggressor against Germany, even though they are politically similar late in the game. The next person that you need to know is General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who will use his success at the helm of commanding forces in World War II to eventually become a United States president, but he was successful in terms of invading German territories or Axis territories in North Africa and Italy to reclaim some of the territory that Mussolini reclaimed. And it was his kind of prowess and leadership of those invasions that made him become the supreme commander of all Allied forces in Europe, which means he wasn't just a general in charge of United States troops, but he was seen as one of the highest, if not the highest ranking military official of all of the Allies who were banded together and fighting against the Axis powers. One of the notable things that he becomes responsible for masterminding is the Allied invasion of France, which we'll talk about the fall of France here in a little bit when we talk about Charles de Gaulle. But he becomes responsible for the creation of the tactics used in Operation Overlord and or D-Day, right? And he was an active presence in the battlefield and kind of seen as, influential. And here he is sitting with several other Allied commanders throughout the war, who we will talk about a couple of these gentlemen here again in a few moments. And here they are at the, planning table. Very photogenic, almost Last Supper kind of moment. So a lot of people make the kind of broad generalization about people who get involved in the military to say that they have, this big desire to fight, this big desire to make war. And I think a very good quote from Eisenhower is this notion that I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can, only one who has seen it is who has seen its brutality, its futility, its stupidity, right? That sure, you may have people who join the military to fight, but not everybody is a war hawk, right? He has seen the devastation and the economic or human costs that war creates, right? And it's something that should only be seen as a last resort, right? Because it doesn't really solve anything in the long term, right? That war is only a short-term solution, that it's a pressure release to some kind of tensions that were building up over time, right? If war solved all problems, then World War I should have been the war to end all wars. But, it wasn't, because here we are talking about, World War II Electric Boogaloo. Another notable American individual during World War II is General George S. Patton, and he led Operation Torch and the invasion of North Africa, and commanded the U.S. Army after the Normandy invasion, right? So he becomes the top-ranking American military official, where, he's only outranked by someone like Eisenhower, because he's the supreme commander of all Allied forces. But he is seen as kind of this big inspirational figure who inspired people to fight and led them to victory across France and eventually infiltrating Nazi Germany, right? And here he is in a, being celebrated as the hero that he is during a parade. So it's interesting kind of looking at this quotation in juxtaposition with what Eisenhower said about war, right? So Patton says, battle is the most magnificent competition in which a human being can indulge. It brings out all that is best, it removes all that is base. All men are afraid in battle. The coward is the one who lets his fear overcome his sense of duty. Duty is the essence of manhood. This is also equally as powerful in terms of what, how people look at war, right? Again, Patton is not saying, we need to fight to prove our masculinity. We need to fight to prove anything, right? He is making the argument that, everybody is afraid in battle, right? You have odds are highly against you, and you're probably going to die if you engage in combat. But what should trump your sense of your individual life, necessarily having meaning is your sense of duty to serve the greater good, serve your country, to serve an idea, an ideology, a philosophy. Um, and I think this is equally as powerful, right? That again, it's not necessarily something we need to fully embrace, but uh, winners win and losers and cowards will lose. Here is a clip from a movie that kind of dramatizes the life and rise from Patton, and uh, the man who plays General George S. Patton is George C. Scott, and this is a clip from the most famous inspirational like speech moment from the film. We'll pause here before we talk about MacArthur and dredge forward. So take a little break, wake yourself back up from my Eeyorish white noise style voice, and I'll see you again in a few minutes.